Well, welcome to another episode of FishingLocalWaters.com. I'm glad you decided to spend the day with us. Today, we are fishing the Little Miami River, which is, and we're a little bit downstream from Loveland, Ohio. About another mile down that direction is the Loveland Castle, which sits on the banks in Sims Township. And we're going to be talking about that in today's episode. We're going to be talking about the castle itself, but more importantly, we're going to be talking about the individual that single-handedly built that castle. His name is Rahe Andrews, and we're going to talk about the Knights of the Golden Trail and talk a little bit about the, I guess it's history associated with that castle and how that came to be. But we look forward to spending the day with you with another episode of FishingLocalWaters.com. Welcome to another episode of FishingLocalWaters.com. Remember, if you're fishing, you're almost always fishing in someone's local waters. So when on private land, talk to the owners and ask permission. And always be courteous and good stewards whenever you're on private or public properties. As a reminder, if you haven't already, please subscribe below. It helps us and allows us to keep you informed. As always, we hope you enjoy this segment of FishingLocalWaters.com. For clarification, I was fishing upstream from Loveland on the Little Miami and downstream from the Foster Bridge on the old 3C highway. The Foster Bridge was built in 1937 and is another wonderful example of D.H. Overman's stunning design of an open spandrel arch bridge. Also note the name of the old 3C highway. Do not confuse the 3C name with the Citizen Conservation Corps of the 1930s. This is State Route 3 that connects Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. This once major highway was built in the 1930s, and because each of the cities that is connected starts with the letter C, this road became known as the 3C Highway. The Carl Rahe Scenic River Access entrance is at 8078 on Old 3C Highway. This is a beautiful but sometimes very busy access point to the Little Miami River. The Loveland Canoe and Kayak Outfitters, owned by Mark and his wife for 20 years, use this access as a launch point. During the filming of this episode, I had the privilege to meet Mark and members of his team. I was impressed by their approach, professionalism, and wonderful demeanor. You can fish upstream of the launch point to get some space, or use the natural riverside trails to mosey downstream. Early morning is quiet, but by 10 o'clock, the parking lot is full of paddlers. I did see several individuals launching personal angler kayaks. One couple told me that they had a second car at Lake Isabella. Their plan was to fish the Little Miami for 7.5 miles in front of the kayakers and then finish their day fishing at Lake Isabella. 2.75 miles downstream from the Carl Rahe Access sits the Knights of the Golden Trail Castle, also known as the Loveland Castle. This fascinating rock structure sits on the right bank facing the river. The locals call it Harry's Castle after the builder. The castle is designed to fight against external and internal conflicts. It is rugged and strong, delicate and beautiful, primitive but amazing. It is overtly visible and laden with secrets. It is practical and grandiose at the same time. It is not just Harry's castle. This is Rahe D. Andrews himself. When it first comes into view, one cannot help but ask questions. Interesting enough, there is a large volume of past media coverage associated with this structure and its builder. However, most of this content is a redundant, regurgitated storyline that is incomplete. What, when, and who are the easiest questions to answer. It is exactly what it looks like. It is a castle. primarily built by one man, Harry Andrews. He laid the cornerstone on Sunday, September the 21st, 1930. Members of the First Universalist Church attended, and Reverend Robert Cummins spoke at the event. From that point forward and until he died on April the 16th in 1981, this was Harry Andrews' personal project. He never married, and he referred to the castle as his family and possible monument. Stone by stone, he collected rocks from the river and hillsides. He mixed mortar and laid course over course until what you see today stood erect on the bank of the Little Miami River. Most sources repeat that the castle features three distinct styles of architectural design: German, French, and English. It is true that several styles were combined in a way that appears most pleasing to the beholder. However, do not think that this is a prime example of the work of a medieval master stonemason. It is not. But then, Harry Andrews never intended it to be a masterpiece example of architectural style or form. His primary goal was for the castle to be functional, meet his original intent, built with local materials, substantially completed within his lifetime with a very limited budget. These 5 criteriums were met, and that alone makes this an amazing story. But as Harry poured his blood, sweat, tears, heart, and soul into this building, it took on the persona of the man himself. To understand this, we have to start from the beginning. The year is 1927, and on April the 1st, the Cincinnati Post runs an article on page 13 featuring Harry D. Andrews, who was then a 36-year-old teacher at the Windsor School of Walnut Hills in Cincinnati, Ohio. 7 young men of his hygiene class were announcing their new school social club they dubbed the Knights of the Golden Trail. The club started 2 months earlier, and they were proud of their membership and sacred oath: to keep themselves chaste and pure, to refrain from any drug or thing that can defile my body, mind, and soul. The boys had pricked their finger and sealed their membership's shingle that featured the sweet, sad face of Sir Galahad, one of the 3 virgin knights of the King Arthur's Round Table. The school colors were purple and gold. The ladies had their club called the Ladies of the Purple Sail, and now the boys had the Knights of the Golden Trail. Harry Andrews was from upstate New York. He graduated in 1916 from Colgate College, also in New York. He enlisted in the Army after graduation and was stationed at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Spent some time in Europe during and after World War I, stopped in Philadelphia before arriving in Cincinnati and becoming a teacher at the Windsor School. The Knights of the Golden Trail started as an elementary social club with a focus on being courageous, honest, clean, and strong. Harry Andrews was aware of the organizational success of the Boy Scouts of America and Dan Beard's work taking place in Cincinnati and Covington, Kentucky. He initially envisioned the Knights of the Golden Trail expanding first within the local school system of Ohio and eventually throughout the United States. Mr. Andrews was rising through the Cincinnati school system. On November the 11th, 1927, the Cincinnati Post listed him as the principal of Windsor School, and on November the 29th, 1927, he was named the new director of the American House, located on the corner of Central Avenue and Bank Streets. I believe I located where the American House once stood. I would love more information. The American House was funded by the Community Chest, now known as United Way, and was used to facilitate Americanization program that instructed immigrants on how to embrace U.S. culture and citizenship and to become loyal and efficient workers. I was surprised to find that the pharmacist John Uri Lloyd once sat on the board of directors for the American House. John is the older brother of Curtis Lloyd that I featured in a recent episode about Leary Lake. The Board of Education was providing most of the Americanization teachers. Since Harry D. Andrews was a school teacher and fluent in several foreign languages, he was a natural for this newly opened position. There was something more. Mr. Andrews never seemed to shy away from voicing his opinion on how others should manage their affairs. Now he was being commissioned to do the same with the large number of immigrants migrating into the Cincinnati's West End. For several years, the American House became Harry Andrews' hub of operation and focus. He moved to 2412 Fairview Avenue, which is less than a mile up the hill in Clifton Heights. He wrote a how-to manual for the immigrants to obtain citizenship and to become good, social-minded, productive Americans. The Knights of the Golden Trail had clubs now at Windsor, Withrow High School, Hyde Park, and a vocational printing school, and were meeting often at the American House and participating in events such as citizenship dinners. On November the 14th, 1930, at a meeting at the Universalist Church of Walnut Hills, the Knights of the Golden Trail met and elected officials to their senior member group. This was 5 years before the Boy Scouts of America created a senior scout division for boys 15 years or older. In 1930, the Great Depression was tightening its hold on the economy, and immigration was becoming a political issue. President Hoover had signed a proclamation establishing an immigration quota for each country in the world. Newspaper articles still mentioned meetings at the American House and listed Harry D. Andrews as the director. However, the concept of Americanization of new immigrants was beginning to be replaced with closed borders, while others promoted celebrating your heritage instead of shedding your culture. Americanization fit in neither of these political camps. Whether or not Harry Andrews felt this political shift, I do not know. We do know that he offered his resignation as director of the American House in May of 1930. Sometime after that date, Harry Andrews began to teach at the Linwood Mount Washington schools, which were on the east side of Cincinnati. He still lived in Clifton Heights, and 50 or more of the Knights of the Golden Trail were meeting at the Universalist Church in Walnut Hills. This church building also has a castle motif and is built of local stone. It may have been an inspiration for given elements of Harry's castle. On May 20th, 1933, church members gathered in the parking lot after church and went to see the progress being made on Harry's castle. 67 days later, Harry's life would completely change. On July 27, 1933, the Cincinnati Post ran an article announcing the arrest of Harry D. Andrews, who was now 43 years of age. The following day, the article headline read, "Teacher Sentence for Molesting Boys," and announced that Harry D. Andrews pled guilty to a charge of contributing to juvenile delinquency and was sentenced to serve a year in the county jail. I do not believe that Harry feared the physical confines of jail. He had served in World War I and later would live very primitively at the castle. He had seen the horrors of war, famine, and disease. Jail itself he could handle. For the last 15 years, he held jobs that encouraged him to tell others how to live, act, and behave. And he thought he understood the message, moral procedures, and predicted outcomes. More importantly, he thought he knew who he was. And yet, here he was, laying wounded at the base of his own pedestal. He had a lot of self-examination to do. I do not know if Harry D. Andrews ever sought or found redemption. I don't know if he ever apologized for the trust he violated and the harm he caused. I truly hope he did. But based on his actions and writings, we do know that he was going to deal with internal and external conflicts, reality and myth. He had and would continue to blend everything together and try to control the narrative. He wouldn't leave himself vulnerable again. He would be rugged and strong, and he would focus on and carefully execute minute details. He had to take stock in his natural assets and use them wisely and creatively. Some things would remain buried but not forgotten. other elements would be overtly visible. He would tell of his own death and resurrection. He was not Lancelot. He had to be Sir Galahad. He had a castle to build for his noble knights, for without it, morality would be lost to the ages. Upon his release from prison, he would be relentless. He had a castle to build. In closing, let me say that this story took us places we didn't want to go. We didn't know of Mr. Andrews' arrest until we unearthed it in the newspaper archives of the Cincinnati Public Library, and it was not included until validation from 2 other newspapers were obtained. In one of the articles, the Catholic Telegraph reports that Mr. Andrews informed Judge Hoffman that while in Philadelphia, he had been under investigation by the Boy Scouts. We went with the story because it became apparent that Mr. Andrews violated the trust of his victims, students, immigrants, church, Cincinnati School District, and social services. The old regurgitated narrative leaves these individuals and organizations in the story as nonchalant, unhurt participants. On the other hand, Mr. Andrews was fighting internal dragons for longer than anyone knew. It is my belief that the castle is a direct descendant of these internal conflicts. The number of stones laid is directly proportional to the magnitude of his internal battle. I feel for all parties involved. According to the legend, Sir Galahad was one of only 2 knights to find the Holy Grail. I believe Mr. Andrews incorporated a replica of the Holy Grail hidden in plain sight within the structure of the castle. I will not tell you where it is. I encourage you to visit the castle and search for the Grail, for it is truly a Shakespearean tragedy of real life. For the truth is often far more interesting than the regurgitated fables of the past.